The discovery of the Sumerian King List began not with a single artifact, but with scattered fragments buried beneath the dust of ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeologists unearthed pieces of clay tablets in different cities: Nippur, Larsa, Kish, Adab, each one carrying lines of cuneiform text that seemed at first glance like ordinary administrative records. But as scholars cleaned, translated, and compared them, a pattern emerged. These tablets were not random documents. They were variations of the same text, copied and recopied for centuries. A record of kingship stretching back into a past so remote, it defied biological and historical logic. But before we jump back in, drop a comment letting us know what time you're tuning in and where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our episodes are reaching. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing exciting topics here on the Primal Roots channel. The text claimed that long before the cities of Uruk or Ur flourished, even before the invention of writing itself, kings had ruled for tens of thousands of years. These individuals, listed centuries after their supposed reigns, were said to have governed vast territories when the world was young, and the gods still walked among men. It didn't match any archaeological evidence. It didn't align with what scientists understood about human lifespan. Yet the Sumerians recorded these reigns as though they were historical truth. To understand why this document exists, it is necessary to step back into the world that produced it. Around 2100 BCE, Mesopotamia was recovering from political fragmentation. City-states had risen and collapsed, empires had formed and dissolved, and dynasties had competed for legitimacy. In this atmosphere, scribes crafted a narrative designed not merely to record history, but to define it. They arranged rulers from different cities into a single chronological line, giving the impression that kingship passed from one city to another in a divinely ordained sequence. The idea was simple yet powerful. Whoever held power now was the rightful heir to a tradition originating at the dawn of human civilization. The earliest part of the list, the so-called antediluvian period, presents the most dramatic claims. Kings ruling for 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 18,600 years. Cities with names that echo through myths rather than excavation sites. These early rulers appear to belong more to the realm of legend than history, yet they are recorded with the same format and structure as later, verifiable kings. Scholars quickly realized the numbers had symbolic meaning. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal numerical system, and high figures often reflected cosmological cycles rather than literal lifespans. These exaggerated reigns might represent entire eras, dynastic collectives, or priestly lineages compressed into singular names. Still, the presence of mythical rulers did not diminish the list's importance. If anything, it strengthened its symbolic power. By connecting contemporary kings to ancient semi-divine predecessors, the document acted as a legitimizing tool. It told the people of Mesopotamia that authority was not random or contested, but part of a continuous chain handed down from the gods. Political instability had fractured the region, but the King List stitched it back together through narrative. The timeline changes dramatically after the mention of a great flood, an event carved into both Mesopotamian myth and geological memory. After this flood, the reign lengths become shorter, more plausible, and more consistent with historical patterns. Cities like Kish, Uruk, Ur, and Lagash dominate the list. Some names match archaeological evidence, giving credibility to the later sections. Among the earliest verifiable kings is Enmebaragesi of Kish, a ruler who appears both in the King List and in independent inscriptions found at his city. Others, like Gilgamesh, straddle the boundary between myth and reality, emerging as cultural heroes whose stories were preserved in epic literature, but whose existence may also rest on kernels of historical truth. The King List was never meant to be a neutral record. Its purpose was ideological. New rulers used it to justify their power by placing themselves within the lineage of ancient kings. When one city-state overthrew another, scribes revised the list, adjusting sequences and emphasizing transitions that favored the latest political agenda. The document evolved with history, reflecting the shifting currents of power across Mesopotamia. Yet its core message remained consistent. Kingship was a divine institution, bestowed upon chosen cities according to cosmic order. The structure of the list reveals this intention. It does not focus on the achievements of each king, nor does it provide detailed narratives. Instead, it presents reign lengths and succession lines in a matter-of-fact style. This format reinforces the idea that kingship is what matters, not the individual ruler or the policies they enacted, but the continuity of authority. To the ancient Sumerians, political legitimacy required not only administrative competence, but also connection to a sacred past. The discovery of multiple versions of the list across different cities demonstrates how deeply this ideology shaped Mesopotamian thought. Some versions differ slightly, reflecting regional pride or political manipulation. Others include additional dynasties or reorder certain successions. Yet all preserve the same fundamental structure, suggesting a shared cultural framework that transcended local rivalries. Over time, the King List became a unifying narrative for a region defined by competing city-states, each claiming divine favor and historical precedence. Archaeologists studying the tablets quickly realized they were dealing with more than a list of rulers. They were looking at a window into how the ancient world constructed its identity. These texts blended history, theology, myth, and politics into a single continuum, shaping collective memory in a way that influenced centuries of Mesopotamian civilization. The King List was not a chronicle meant for neutral record-keeping. It was a carefully crafted story with a purpose: to establish order in a world where power often shifted violently. As scholars translated more versions, the document's complexity deepened. Certain kings appear only in some tablets, implying that scribes selectively preserved or erased figures depending on political needs. Some reign lengths were recalculated or corrected. In a few cases, entire dynasties were compressed into a single line, while others were expanded or glorified. These modifications reveal the list's role as a living document rather than a fixed historical account. It adapted to the political realities of each generation, functioning as a tool of statecraft as much as a record of the past. Despite these manipulations, the King List also preserves invaluable historical data. Many post-flood rulers correspond to archaeological evidence, their names appearing on cylinder seals, monuments, and administrative records. When compared with other texts, economic tablets, royal inscriptions, temple archives, the list helps reconstruct a clearer timeline of early Mesopotamian civilization. It demonstrates when certain cities rose to prominence, when political power shifted, and how dynasties interacted with one another. Yet the true significance of the Sumerian King List lies not simply in the rulers it names, but in what it reveals about the ancient mind. The Sumerians viewed history as a cycle shaped by divine will, not a secular progression of events. Kingship, to them, was a sacred force that descended from heaven. It did not emerge naturally or evolve politically. It appeared fully formed, bestowed upon humanity as a guiding principle. The list reflects this worldview, presenting history as an ordered sequence rather than a chaotic process. Every line of the list reinforces the idea that civilization is fragile, dependent on divine approval and human obedience. The flood functions as a symbolic reset, separating mythic antiquity from recorded history. After this reset, the reigns become shorter, more realistic, and more grounded in the archaeological record. This division mirrors the Sumerian worldview. Humanity's early relationship with the divine was more direct and powerful, while later ages became increasingly human and less cosmic. The King List is one of the earliest attempts in human history to organize collective memory, to create a structured narrative of the past that legitimizes the present. It is both a product of its time and a foundation for future civilizations. Later cultures, including the Babylonians and Assyrians, adopted similar lists, shaping their histories around sequences of kings that reinforced their political and religious ideologies. Even modern concepts of dynastic chronology and historical continuity owe something to the intellectual tradition that began with these tablets. In the end, the Sumerian King List is less about literal chronology and more about how ancient people understood their place in time. It represents an effort to impose order on a vast and uncertain past, blending mythic memory with historical fact to create a framework that explained the world's origins and justified its power structures. Its exaggerated reigns, legendary rulers, and symbolic divisions reveal a civilization striving to connect itself to something eternal, shaping a narrative that would echo through millennia. The earliest section of the Sumerian King List reads like a message sent from a world that should not exist. Long before any city-state carved monuments or recorded agriculture, the text claims that kingship descended from heaven and settled in Eridu, the first city of humankind according to Sumerian tradition. What follows is a sequence of rulers whose reigns stretch far beyond the boundaries of biology and into the realm of cosmic symbolism. Figures ruling for 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. These numbers challenge our understanding not only of human history, but of how ancient cultures constructed time itself. The antediluvian kings are more than exaggerated characters. They represent entire eras encoded into numerical patterns. To the modern eye, the longevity assigned to these rulers appears fantastical. But the Sumerians used base 60 mathematics, embedding celestial cycles, astronomical observations, and sacred numerology into political records. A reign of 36,000 years is not random. It equals multiples of 60, symbolizing full cosmic rotations, divine completeness, and the eternal order of the heavens. These kings likely represent ancestral dynasties, priestly lineages, or mythic ages remembered through deep-time storytelling rather than literal historical individuals. Archaeology supports this interpretation. No physical structures or artifacts from the period attributed to these early kings survive, and no independent inscriptions reference them outside the king list. Their cities, though legendary in tone, often correspond to real locations: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Shurupak. These places existed, but not in the era of cosmic monarchs. Excavations show early settlement layers dating back to the late 6th millennium BCE, impressive for their time, yet far removed from the mythic scale described in the list. The exaggerated reigns reflect a worldview where history and mythology intertwined seamlessly, creating narratives that blended divine authority with political legitimacy. The flood marks a pivotal boundary in this text, not merely as a mythological event, but as a symbolic transition between eras. Written traditions across Mesopotamia describe a massive inundation that reshaped civilization. Geological evidence suggests that between 5000 and 3000 BCE, the region experienced large-scale flooding events linked to rising water tables, river shifts, and climatic changes. Whether any single catastrophe inspired the myth is debated, but the cultural memory of destructive floods was strong enough to anchor the king list's timeline. After the flood, the list shifts into a more grounded phase. Reign lengths become shorter, cities align with archaeological layers, and historical rulers emerge. This shift underscores the symbolic function of the flood, a cosmic reset dividing the mythic world from the human one. The Sumerians believed that before this reset, kings and gods interacted directly. Afterwards, rule became increasingly human, though still divinely sanctioned. The antediluvian section also reveals the political purpose of the king list. By tracing kingship back to a sacred origin, the first city blessed by the gods, later dynasties could claim continuity with primeval authority. The earliest kings exist less as historical figures and more as anchors for cultural identity. Their exaggerated features reinforce the idea that the institution of kingship was eternal and cosmically ordained. Modern scholars examining the list note its careful structure. The early kings are presented with precision: number of rulers, duration of reigns, sequence of cities. This formality reinforces the legitimacy of later rulers by placing them at the end of a long, divinely guided lineage. For a city-state recovering from political fragmentation, such a narrative was a powerful tool. It provided ideological unity, reminding people that kingship flowed through a predetermined path set by the gods. These early rulers also represent the Sumerian attempt to make sense of deep time. Before written history, memory existed through oral tradition, stories passed down over generations, reshaped by cultural evolution. Such narratives rarely distinguish between human ancestors, mythic beings, and cosmological symbolism. By incorporating these elements into a written list, scribes preserved a bridge between myth and record, transforming oral memory into structured chronology. Some theories propose that the numbers reflect lunar or solar cycles, astronomical periods that ancient scholars encoded into the list as sacred metaphors. Others argue that the kings were not individuals, but entire dynasties condensed into emblematic names. Both interpretations reflect the sophistication of early Mesopotamian thought, a worldview in which mathematics, religion, and politics formed a unified intellectual system. Even the choice of cities in the antediluvian section carries symbolic meaning. Eridu, the first city, was associated with Enki, the god of wisdom and freshwater. Bad Tabira linked to metallurgy. Larak and Sipar connected to celestial deities and priestly traditions. The inclusion of these cities suggests an attempt to map divine attributes onto historical geography, reinforcing political narratives through theological geography. The King List, even in its earliest sections, reveals a civilization that understood the power of narrative. The Sumerians did not simply recount the past, they shaped it. They built a timeline that connected their present rulers to primordial forces, giving kingship a cosmic legitimacy unmatched by ordinary political authority. By presenting the earliest kings as semi-divine figures ruling for impossible lengths of time, the list offered rulers something far more valuable than factual precision. It offered divine continuity. And yet, beneath the mythic surface, the list preserves echoes of real transitions. The shift of kingship from one city to another mirrors the archaeological record. Periods when Eridu prospered, when Kish rose to prominence, when Uruk became a center of political experimentation. Even though the rulers' reigns are exaggerated, their cities reflect real historical cycles of dominance. The antediluvian kings, therefore, serve as both mythic archetypes and symbolic placeholders. They set the stage for everything that follows, allowing the Sumerian King List to function as a political document, a religious artifact, and one of humanity's earliest attempts to write history. When the King List transitions from the antediluvian era into the age after the flood, the tone of the document changes dramatically. The exaggerated reigns of tens of thousands of years disappear, replaced by numbers that, while still long by modern standards, align more closely with the rhythms of human society. It is here that archaeology and written memory finally begin to overlap. The mythical age ends, and the arc of early Mesopotamian history becomes visible through excavated cities, surviving inscriptions, and administrative tablets. This shift marks the moment when the King List steps out of legend and into the first faint traces of verifiable human governance. The first post-Diluvian city to receive kingship is Kish. This shift is not random. For the Sumerians, Kish held immense symbolic value as the first center of restored civilization after a cosmic reset. Its rulers, according to the list, established the renewed order, structuring society in the aftermath of devastation. Archaeology confirms that Kish was indeed one of the earliest and most influential city-states of early dynastic Mesopotamia. Excavations reveal monumental buildings, sophisticated irrigation systems, and evidence of organized political authority. This alignment between text and material culture suggests that, although the reign lengths remained idealized, the figures recorded in this section reflect genuine historical memory. Among the names associated with Kish, one stands out: Enmebarajesi. He is the first ruler in the King List who can be corroborated archaeologically. Several inscriptions bearing his name have been found, confirming his existence and influence. His reign likely occurred around the early 3rd millennium BCE. He represents a turning point in the document, the bridge between mythic ruler lists and the beginnings of documented political history. Through him, the King List steps into the realm of factual chronology. This period also marks the appearance of a complex regional landscape, characterized by competing city-states, shifting alliances, and early forms of organized warfare. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Adab, Lagash, and Shuruppak rose and fell in cycles that reflect the dynamic nature of early Mesopotamian politics. These cities were more than settlements. They were centers of innovation, religion, and administrative control. Their rulers built temples, expanded irrigation networks, and oversaw economies that managed grain, livestock, textiles, and labor on massive scales. The king list presents these successions in a linear sequence, as if kingship passed neatly from city to city. But archaeology shows that reality was far more complex. Rival dynasties often coexisted, each with its own political agenda. Battles between city-states were frequent, and the concept of a single ruling dynasty dominating all others at any given moment is more ideological than literal. The king list compresses this complexity into a streamlined narrative, simplifying overlapping power struggles into a single chain of legitimate rule. This simplification served a purpose. Ancient Mesopotamian society valued cosmic order, and the king list imposed order on a chaotic historical landscape. It shaped memory, aligning turbulent political events with a narrative of divinely guided succession. Even when multiple dynasties contested power, the list highlights only one at a time, presenting the victorious city as the chosen recipient of divine kingship. One of the most fascinating figures to emerge in this post-flood era is Gilgamesh of Uruk. Although best known from epic literature, his name also appears in the king list, suggesting that he may have been an actual ruler whose deeds evolved into legend. The archaeological layers of Uruk correspond to a flourishing period of monumental architecture, advanced urban planning, and economic complexity, a reality that likely inspired the hero's larger-than-life portrayal. Whether Gilgamesh was a real king or a composite of several leaders, his inclusion in the king list indicates that the boundaries between myth and history remained porous even in the document's more historical sections. The cycles of power reflected in the king list also align with geological and ecological changes. Shifts in river courses, fluctuations in rainfall, and sediment deposits shaped which cities thrived or declined. For example, the rise of Ur and Uruk correlates with periods of increased water availability in southern Mesopotamia. Conversely, droughts or water mismanagement could weaken entire dynasties, making way for new centers of power. The list compresses these transitions into clean successions, but beneath them lie environmental factors that influenced political stability. As the narrative progresses, kingship continues to migrate between cities, sometimes remaining for a few reigns, sometimes for entire dynasties. Each transition is framed as a moment of divine decision, but archaeologists interpret these shifts through the lens of economic expansion, territorial conflict, technological advancements, and demographic change. The king list's narrative of smooth, divinely guided succession masks the turbulent realities of early state formation. Nevertheless, the list preserves crucial details about these dynasties. The city of Ur appears multiple times, associated with rulers who oversaw major cultural developments, including standardized writing, extensive trade, and monumental construction projects. Lagash, though smaller, played an outsized role in regional politics, producing rulers known for administrative reforms, temple expansions, and military campaigns. These developments appear indirectly in the king list's successive dynasties, reflecting real patterns of shifting influence. The post-Diluvian kings also reveal the evolution of political ideology. Early rulers were closely tied to temple institutions, often acting as intermediaries between gods and citizens. Over time, kingship became increasingly secularized, with rulers projecting power through military achievements, territorial expansion, and economic control. Yet the king list preserves the religious veneer, framing kingship as a sacred trust bestowed upon chosen cities. This era also marks the emergence of administrative sophistication. Clay tablets from this period document taxes, trade transactions, labor organization, and legal matters. The king list reflects this growing bureaucratic complexity indirectly through its orderly succession of rulers. Although it offers no details about individual achievements, Its very structure suggests an underlying administrative tradition capable of preserving long-term historical records. Another remarkable feature of the post-flood section is its consistency across different versions of the King List. While earlier sections show more variation, the historical kings appear with similar names and reign lengths across multiple tablets. This consistency indicates that these rulers were widely recognized across Mesopotamia, their memory preserved through generations of scribes, storytellers, and temple record keepers. The more the list progresses, the closer it gets to a timeline supported by independent evidence. The later early dynastic kings can be compared with inscriptions found on monuments, seals, and administrative documents. These cross-references help modern scholars reconstruct the chronology of ancient Mesopotamia with greater confidence. Yet even in this increasingly historical phase, the King List maintains its ideological purpose. It tells a story not just of kings, but of cities rising and falling according to divine order. It presents a universe where political power is not merely a human construct, but part of a cosmic design. This worldview would influence not only the Sumerians but also the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, who inherited their traditions. By the end of this chapter of the King List, a clear transformation has occurred. The mythic kings of impossible lifespans give way to rulers anchored in time and geography. The Great Flood separates an age of divine proximity from an age of human governance, and the cities of early Mesopotamia begin to form the political and cultural framework that would define the region for millennia. As the Sumerian King List moves deeper into the post-flood dynasties, the narrative broadens from legendary rulers to a complex tapestry of political competition across early Mesopotamia. The simple linear structure of the list suggests kingship passed seamlessly from one city to another, but the archaeological record reveals a far more turbulent reality. City-states fought, traded, negotiated, and restructured themselves in cycles that shaped the world's earliest political landscape. The King List compresses this dynamic environment into a single thread of succession, presenting the impression of order where instability often reigned. This tension between narrative simplicity and historical complexity is at the heart of the King List. It functions as both historical memory and ideological construction. By presenting one city at a time as the divinely chosen seat of kingship, the text creates a clean sequence even when real conditions were chaotic. Scribes streamlined decades of competing regimes, overlapping authorities, and contested borders into a document that offered legitimacy to whoever held power when it was written. The fourth chapter of this evolving timeline focuses on an era of intensifying rivalry between major Sumerian cities. Kish, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Umma emerged as dominant forces, each vying to control trade routes, irrigation networks, and religious authority. These cities were not mere settlements but highly organized urban centers with temples, palaces, markets, craft workshops, and administrative systems. Their interactions, whether peaceful or violent, shaped the political map of early civilization. Among the most influential cities of this era was Uruk, whose rulers often appear at critical transitions in the King List. Uruk's prominence stemmed from several factors: fertile agricultural zones, proximity to trade routes connecting the Persian Gulf to northern Mesopotamia, and religious prestige tied to the goddess Inanna. Excavations reveal monumental architecture such as temples, ziggurats, and administrative complexes dating back to the late Uruk period. This infrastructural development laid the foundation for the city's repeated rise in the political hierarchy. Meanwhile, Kish continued to wield symbolic authority long after losing military dominance. Because the King List identifies Kish as the first city to receive kingship after the flood, its rulers enjoyed a form of ancestral prestige. Later dynasties invoked Kishite legitimacy to strengthen their own claims to power. Even when the city was politically overshadowed, its ideological influence remained strong, illustrating the enduring impact of early narrative frameworks on political identity. Another major center, Lagash, provides a striking example of how historical realities diverged from the simplified timeline of the list. The rulers of Lagash, including Ur-Nanshe, Eannatum, and Urukagina, left extensive inscriptions detailing territorial expansion, temple reforms, and conflicts with neighboring Umma. These records, carved into stone and preserved through millennia, reveal a city engaged in continuous power struggles that the King List compresses into brief dynastic references. The famous conflict between Lagash and Umma over irrigated land, recorded on the stele of the vultures, provides one of the earliest examples of documented interstate warfare. Yet the King List barely acknowledges these dramatic events, preferring a neat succession of kingship transferred to, rather than recounting battles or political turmoil. This contrast emphasizes the King List's primary function, not to narrate events, but to codify legitimacy. For the scribes who crafted it, the crucial question was not who won each battle, but which city ultimately emerged as the rightful steward of kingship in the eyes of the gods. The list offers a stable sequence, but beneath this veneer lies the reality of shifting alliances, economic pressures, and military campaigns. The importance of irrigation cannot be overstated in this era. Mesopotamian cities depended on complex canal systems to transform arid plains into fertile agricultural zones. Control of water routes meant control of food, labor, and economic stability. Conflicts between cities often erupted over irrigation boundaries, not out of ideological differences, but because water rights were essential for survival. These disputes shaped political boundaries, fueled wars, and influenced which city could rise as the next center of kingship. Yet the King List simplifies these struggles into the simple transfer of power from one city to another. The era also saw the rise of increasingly sophisticated administrative systems. Clay tablets from this period show extensive records of grain storage, livestock management, taxation, trade transactions, and temple offerings. These records illustrate a world governed not only by military might, but by bureaucratic control. Kingship became tied to economic management, and rulers were expected to ensure stability in a region susceptible to environmental challenges. The King List, though silent about these administrative details, reflects their importance indirectly through the longevity of certain dynasties and the recurrence of specific cities. It is during this phase of early state formation that the groundwork for later empires was laid. Political fragmentation, the hallmark of early dynastic Mesopotamia, created opportunities for ambitious rulers to consolidate power. Some sought dominance through alliances, others through warfare, and others still through religious authority. Temples played a central role in legitimizing rulers, acting as both economic centers and ideological anchors. Priests and scribes maintained the records, rituals, and narratives that connected human rule to divine will. The King List, written and preserved by scribes, reflects this temple-based worldview. One of the most intriguing figures from this era is Lugal-Zaghazi, the ruler of Umma who briefly united much of Sumer under his control. His inscriptions boast of dominion from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, an early example of interstate conquest in the region. Although his empire was short-lived, his appearance in the King List demonstrates the document's adaptive nature. Scribes incorporated his rule into the narrative, presenting it as part of the divinely sanctioned sequence, even though archaeology shows it was achieved through force rather than smooth succession. His career highlights the interplay between military ambition and ideological framing in early Mesopotamian politics. Lugal-Zaghazi's reign ultimately came to an abrupt end with the rise of Sargon of Akkad, a name absent from earlier Sumerian traditions, but central to the transformation of Mesopotamia. Sargon emerged from northern Mesopotamia and forged the world's first multinational empire, a development that reshaped the political landscape so profoundly that the King List had to accommodate this new reality. Although the King List does not recount his campaigns, it acknowledges the Akkadian dynasty as the next phase of legitimate rule. This recognition reflects the document's continual evolution, integrating new powers into an ancient framework designed to endure political upheaval. The Akkadian period marks a crucial turning point. For the first time, kingship extended beyond a single Sumerian city-state to encompass a vast region unified under centralized rule. This expansion required new administrative strategies, including standardized weights, a unified language for official use, and extensive record-keeping. These innovations strengthened imperial control and left a durable archaeological footprint, from royal inscriptions to monumental art depicting the king's authority. The King List incorporates these rulers seamlessly, demonstrating its role as both a historical chronicle and a political instrument designed to reinforce imperial legitimacy. As the Akkadian Empire eventually declined due to internal struggles, environmental stress, and external pressures, the city of Ur rose to prominence with the third dynasty of Ur. This dynasty, often called the Ur III period, represents a pinnacle of bureaucratic sophistication in the ancient world. Thousands of administrative tablets survive from this era, documenting everything from labor assignments to grain distribution. The King List reflects this structured world through its detailed enumeration of Ur's rulers. These kings were not just political leaders, but architects of a highly organized state that influenced later Mesopotamian governance. Throughout this chapter of the King List, one theme remains constant: the interplay between real political events and their ideological reinterpretation. The text presents a lineage of rulers guided by divine authority, but archaeology reveals a dynamic environment where human ambition, environmental challenges, and economic pressures shaped political outcomes. The list transforms this complexity into a coherent narrative that ensured every ruler, whether warlord or administrator, could place themselves within a sacred continuum stretching back to the dawn of civilization. This chapter of the King List concludes just before the rise of even larger geopolitical transformations, setting the stage for a world where city-state competition would give way to expansive empires. The Sumerians may not have foreseen how their political landscape would evolve, but their scribes ensured that the story of kingship, as they understood it, would survive. Their tablets record not only rulers and reign lengths, but the philosophical foundation of governance itself. That authority is part of a cosmic order, and that every city, every dynasty, and every king plays a role in a story far older than any individual. By the time the late dynasties of Sumer and Akkad began to fade from the political landscape of Mesopotamia, the Sumerian King List had already evolved into something far larger than a simple record of rulers. It had become a philosophical structure, a framework for understanding power, legitimacy, and the meaning of history itself. The final chapter of this ancient document, as reconstructed by archaeologists and philologists, reveals how deeply the King List shaped the civilizations that inherited the region, and how its influence quietly echoed through millennia of political thought. The later sections of the King List coincide with the rise of increasingly complex states and empires, each one leaving behind administrative archives, monumental inscriptions, and vast networks of trade and communication. As rulers expanded their authority, scribes revisited the King List to incorporate new dynasties into the lineage. The document functioned as a living text, continually updated to reflect the current distribution of power, while maintaining an image of cosmic continuity. This continuous adaptation allowed the list to transcend its original context and become a shared cultural anchor across diverse populations of Mesopotamia. During the third dynasty of Ur, one of the most administratively advanced periods in ancient history, the King List solidified its canonical form. The rulers of Ur III were masters of bureaucracy. Their scribes recorded economic transactions, labor assignments, taxation, land management, and legal procedures with unprecedented precision. Thousands of tablets survive from this era, providing a near-daily account of life in a highly regulated society. These scribes, trained in temple schools and supported by royal patronage, preserved earlier traditions while reshaping them to legitimize their kings. The King List reflected this sophisticated worldview by portraying Ur's rulers as rightful heirs to both antediluvian mythology and post-diluvian political order. Kings like Shulgi and Amar-Sin appear within the document's final sequence, presented as the culmination of dynastic history, stretching back into a mythic past. This continuity was not simply symbolic, it served practical purposes. By aligning themselves with an unbroken tradition, the kings of Ur strengthened their legitimacy in a region marked by frequent upheavals and shifting loyalties. But the stability of the Ur III period was short-lived. Environmental pressures, including drought, soil salinization, and shifts in river courses, weakened agricultural output. Mountain tribes from the northeast, the Amorites, became increasingly powerful, eventually breaking through the administrative defenses of the empire. Internal political strains amplified these vulnerabilities, and within a few generations, the sophisticated bureaucracy of Ur dissolved. As new rulers took control, they inherited not only the ruins of an old political system, but also the ideological tools that sustained it. Among these was the Sumerian King List. The Amorites, who would later establish the famous Old Babylonian dynasty, adapted the list to validate their own authority. By copying and preserving earlier versions, they inserted themselves into the long narrative of kingship, presenting their rule as another chapter in an unbroken sequence ordained by the gods. The most famous of these Babylonian rulers, Hammurabi, ruled in the 18th century BCE and became known for his legal reforms and administrative achievements. Although his law code receives more attention today, the ideological landscape that supported his rule was shaped by traditions inherited from Sumer. The King List provided the framework that allowed incoming dynasties to claim authority through continuity rather than conquest alone. Even when political realities shifted dramatically, the narrative remained stable. Kingship passed from one center of power to another with cosmic inevitability. As Mesopotamia transitioned into the Babylonian and later Assyrian periods, the King List continued to be copied, referenced, and expanded. Assyrian scribes, trained in the same ancient literary traditions as their Sumerian and Babylonian predecessors, viewed history as a divinely guided lineage of rulers. They adopted the structure of the King List to justify their own empires, framing Assyrian dominance as the latest phase of an ancient cosmic order. By integrating older Sumerian dynasties into their official histories, they strengthened their claims of universal kingship. The durability of the King List lies in its elegant simplicity. It offered a clear, linear narrative of power, one ruler at a time, one city at a time, each receiving authority as if part of a divine relay. This structure appealed to rulers seeking legitimacy, to scribes documenting political order, and to priests maintaining cosmic harmony through ritual and record. Even as languages changed from Sumerian to Akkadian, and later to Babylonian dialects, the conceptual foundation remained stable. Meanwhile, the actual clay tablets that preserved the King List circulated widely. Some were copied by students in scribal schools, where they served as both political instruction and linguistic exercise. Others were archived in temple libraries, kept alongside mythological texts, hymns, and administrative documents. These copies exhibit variations, adjusted reign lengths, inserted dynasties, or regional biases, reflecting the evolving political agendas of each era. Yet despite these differences, the core sequence remained recognizable. Scribes across centuries agreed on the fundamental order of early dynasties, reaffirming the authority of the ancient Sumerian worldview. As time passed, the political landscape of Mesopotamia continued to shift. Empires rose and fell, foreign powers invaded, and the languages of administration evolved. But even as the original Sumerian cities declined, the ideological influence of their King List persisted. Babylonian scholars continued to reproduce the text long after the last native Sumerian speakers were gone. The document became a cultural bridge linking new empires to the remote origins of urban civilization. Its impact extended beyond Mesopotamia. Later cultures in the region adopted similar forms of historical recording, including sequential king lists that traced legitimacy back to divine or semi-divine ancestors. The Hittites, for example, crafted genealogies linking their kings to mythical founders. The Egyptians maintained lists of pharaohs that blended early divine rulers with historical figures. Even in the biblical traditions of the ancient Levant, genealogies stretching back to mythical patriarchs reflect a worldview deeply influenced by older Mesopotamian narratives. In this broader context, the Sumerian King List becomes more than an artifact. It becomes a template, a structural innovation, a model for how civilization conceives of time, authority, and the memory of the past. Its structure, mythic origins followed by increasingly historical rulers, foreshadows the very way later societies organized their histories. The ancient scribes who inscribed those early clay tablets unknowingly shaped how humans across eras would think about genealogy, kingship, and national identity. Yet for all its ideological power, the King List also preserves genuine historical data. Its later sections align closely with archaeological evidence, providing a framework for reconstructing the chronology of early Mesopotamia. When combined with economic tablets, royal inscriptions, and excavated architecture, the King List becomes a valuable tool for modern historians. It helps synchronize timelines, clarify dynastic sequences, and reveal patterns of political transition that shaped the earliest states. The closing dynasties of the King List reflect a world on the verge of major transformation. The gradual shift from Sumerian to Akkadian dominance, the rise of Amorite polities, and the emergence of Babylonian hegemony all unfold in its final lines. These transitions signal the end of an era, not the end of civilization, but the end of Sumerian identity as a living culture. Their language faded, their cities changed hands, and their traditions were absorbed into the broader Mesopotamian world. But their intellectual legacy endured. The Sumerian King List stands as one of humanity's earliest attempts to organize history. It transforms myth into chronology, memory into structure, and politics into cosmic narrative. It reveals how ancient societies understood themselves, how they justified authority, and how they connected the present to a distant, mysterious past. Long after the last Sumerian dynasty disappeared, the tablets remained, silent but enduring witnesses to a worldview that shaped the foundations of written history. When archaeologists uncovered them thousands of years later, they found not only a list of rulers, but a blueprint for the human story. One ruler after another, one city after another, all bound together by the enduring belief that order, legitimacy, and meaning originate from something larger than human ambition. In the end, the King List is not merely a document. It is the earliest surviving map of time. The Sumerian King List remains one of the most mysterious documents ever discovered. A text that blends mythology, politics, and history in a structure that has challenged scholars for over a century. If you want to dive deeper into ancient enigmas and documents that still puzzle modern science, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. See you soon.